We have a fairly quick program tonight. We have some guest speakers that I want to bring up that are going to entertain us because we're really going to be addressing, almost in a Ken Burns style documentary, the way our hobby has begun to flourish since the 1960s. Because the hobby back in the 1960s looked a lot different than it does today.
It was all the same people as are in this room now.
Well, yeah. But I don't think any of them had the gray hair that they have now.
Or no hair.
Or no hair, yeah.
Or both. Sorry.
Okay.
Sitting down.
So this is going to be an evening in which we're going to introduce you to some names that you may have read about in the magazines but never met. We have some great stories to tell about some of those individuals. You're going to be learning a lot about the early years of the hobby, but also how much the hobby has changed since the 1960s. And I think you'll come to appreciate even more the way we've had three major events come together 40 years ago, virtually at the same time. We had the creation of the NNL, we had the introduction of Scale Auto, and then we had the creation of the GSL contest out in Salt Lake City with Mark Gustafson. Mark sends his regrets. He planned to be here. He had worked real hard to put together a very special event for everybody tomorrow, with a number of very, very historic models being brought in from Salt Lake City by the Hadleys, who are here, who shepherded the models in. And Mark sent me emails every 30 minutes to make sure that everything was going right. He actually did send me a speech. In lieu of him not being here, we have Mark's actual words, which we're going to ask Tom Woodruff to read a little bit later, if he can get through tendentious and some of the other legal terms that Mark threw in his speech.
If he has the latest version.
I think the best way to start, though, is to really go back to the 1960s. And let me just see a show of hands. How many people started building models back in the 1960s?
About 4.
Wow, that's great. How many people got their start reading Car Model magazine back in the 1960s? Yeah, that was a big seminal event for a lot of cars.
All car science.
Model car science also. How many people remember the original tester contest, the Revell Tester and the Revell Pactor contest? Anybody enter those? Okay, a few of us. Anybody win one of them? Anybody win a national championship in one of them? You could raise your hand a little higher, Rick. Okay. We have Rick Morgan here with us. Rick has a phenomenal history and a phenomenal story to tell, and I'm going to invite Rick to come up on stage with me right now to kind of go through some questions and also talk about some of the personages that he's known that we all came to know throughout our contact with Car Model and the Model Car Journal and Model Car Science. So everybody, Rick Morgan. And I don't know how well, can you hear us all right?
Yeah.
How about Mark? Can you hear us all right back there? Okay. For those of you who don't know, back in the 1960s, we had some major model car contests that were sponsored by Revell. We had Revell Testers, Revell Pactor, and according to the Model Car magazine, we had millions of entries that were going into those contests. I think the early contests were mail-in, weren't they?
I believe they were.
Yeah.
I think most of them. I don't think they carried any of them out there by hand on the West Coast for judging.
Okay, I'm going to let Rick kind of fill us in. Rick was national champion at the age of 15. Okay? And as a result of winning the national championship, and I love this part of the story, he won a full-size Chevrolet Corvair Monza from the Chevrolet Corporation. And he was too young to drive it. What happened to him?
I got older. And I fit in it very well. We drove it everywhere. It had a misfortune in that somebody fitted in the back end and destroyed it, I guess, one night.
Oh.
But it was a great little car. We had it for 3 years. I think we had the car for 3 years before it was destroyed. And it was a lot of fun. It was 4 carburetors, and it was a 4-speed, and it was teal on the outside and white leather on the inside, and you looked at it when it drove by.
Can I ask a question?
Are you waving or asking a question?
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
Can you express your feeling when you knew you won that car?
No, I can't.
No?
I remember the phone call. 5:30 in the morning, my dad answers the phone, and that wasn't unusual because we were in the transportation business, and phone calls at any time always happens. And he said, yes, no, I'll have him call, thank you very much. And he hung up the phone, and I can hear through the rooms his words. He said, he just won the Nationals. I said, what? And he told me there was a phone call from California. It was quite the moment in our family.
Yeah.
It really was.
Great.
Yeah. And I think it was the Car Model Annual 1965 that featured you and some of the articles
we
inside.
did a lot of articles back then for Oscar.
Rick's association with the hobby also ties into some really interesting people that we've all known and come to love over the years. One of those was Oscar Kowaleski.
Yes.
And
I hope someday everybody can meet an Oscar Kowaleski. He was just he is a brilliant man. Oscar is aging, but he is still Mach 2 with his hair on fire while he's sitting here with you.
Yes,
He's tremendous to be with. He really is.
now you got your start entering model car contests at the hobby shop, Kowaleski.
Yeah, Oscar's father, Anthony Kowaleski, he had back in the 50s or so, he was marketing some cast iron toys, little mini models, etc. And he would sell them, and that grew into a very nice sized hobby center that was the focal point for the model cars and the contests and people needing the supplies and a place to be centralized as to where to go every 6 months as a car contest over there. And that thing just got very, very popular. Quite a few ex-model builders worked there for Oscar's father, Tony Kowaleski. And they're all well known. Some of them, I think some of them still work with model cars. Quite a few of them, unfortunately, have passed on. But they're just very good people. It was all centered around Tony Kowaleski and his son Oscar, and Oscar just could drive anything, anywhere in a store. He was just a brilliant guy for developing a whole product line, and he was fun to work with.
When did you set up Auto World?
Auto World was before I met Oscar. Auto World, when I first met Oscar, was on the 7th floor of the old Scranton Life building in downtown Scranton. And then he grew out of that, and he wound up buying a big truck garage from one of his in-laws, a lady by the name of Julia Ivanek out of the Scranton area. And she had a big garage, and one thing leads to another. Before you know it, there's her other son-in-laws involved in the trucking companies, and that building became available, and Oscar grabbed it. Oscar was a great entrepreneur. He really knew how to go about things, and he was just cast iron. He was a rock. He would come into the working place that I used for photography and writing, and he would say something like, "Morgan, I have 200 extra sets of wire wheels. Sell them." And I said, "You're in trouble, Oscar." But that's how life was with those guys. Oscar lived on the edge. He could just go and do whatever, and he was successful at it. That was the fun part. It's having fun and seeing the thing work out. And Oscar thoroughly enjoyed that. He had an old 59 Chevy station wagon. It was loaded with Auto World lettering and decals and everything else. And it was loaded with parts. And it rattled and rolled, and that car was known everywhere. That's Oscar. And he could be going up to the Can-Am races at Watkins Glen, or he can be going to a little neighborhood model car contest. Didn't matter. He was out, the car was a high presence to that station wagon, and everybody who even came in contact with him said, "Boy, does he ever slow down?" Because, he called me at my office one morning, and he said, "Morgan, I got to do this, and this, and I'm doing that, and we got to get this done." And after 15 minutes of a soliloquy, he says, "Well, you're probably busy, so goodbye." He has an old friend who's been with him for decades, Jack Darren. And Jack was an excellent Can-Am mechanic. They won in '72, I believe, the National Can-Am Championship with Oscar driving his McLaren. Oscar was a very, very good driver. They won that, and I think, was it the Sports Car Club of America version that he won? And I called Jack, and I said, Oscar just called. And he's just rattling for 15 minutes. He says, but you're busy. Click. And he said, call him and tell him to take a pill. I said, thank you very much, Jack. And that's our Oscar. He's just a special, special guy.
We've all got great memories of ordering stuff from Auto World. I think a lot of us have old Auto World catalogs. I've got a lot of old Auto World waxes and finishes and stuff. It's been incredible, all the stuff that he was able to provide to us as modelers.
People like me who grew up out in the middle of nowhere, they were our connection.
Yeah, in many, many ways. Talk about car models, because you were also
That was an
associated with car models.
experience. Yes. That was, Oscar got together with Bob McLeod out of New Jersey, I believe. And they started taking a small, every other month mini version, and they blew it up into a monthly model car science, except it's a different name, and it came out as Car Model. And it was very popular. I was walking out of the Scranton Hobby Center, I think I was 13 at the time, and I feel a hand on my shoulder and my shirt, and just, I got to get you up to the 7th floor of the Scranton Life building. You got to come to work for me. And I'm thinking, I'm just trying to get into freshman. And I went up to see him, and he said, I want you to do this. And he said, this will be your photo section, this will be your writing in your model building, yada, yada, yada. And how can you turn the guy down? So I took the job, and I had a ball with it. I was the only kid in high school writing for a career as a freshman. And it was that kind of a deal with Oscar. He didn't have any fears of tackling anything. He would, I'm buying that place, and I'm going to make it go. When he left the Scranton Life building, this was one small floor of an insurance company building in downtown Scranton, and he took it to probably an 80 or 90,000 square feet truck shop. He said, Oscar, that's going to take some horsepower. He pulled it off. He had McLarens in the showroom, he had Ferraris in the showroom, he had model car displays, and he had, at the time, the big thing was the slot car. And he had those tracks, and Oscar would be all over on weekends in the Scranton-Wilkes-Barre area, setting up the tracks and letting kids race the cars. He was a life experience with that man.
You also had contact with some of the writers for Car Model, and one in particular that we're familiar with is Dave Shuffles.
Oh, yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about Dave?
I can tell you a lot about Dave.
Please
Dave
do.
was, I met David when I was 12 or 13, and I knew him for several years. And he, everybody's heard of Dave Shuffles?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Did you ever see him work? David laid on a pallet in his living room. He was on a wooden framework, laying on the floor with a mattress on top of it. And his hands, I used to be able, his hands were inverted. And that's how he did everything, with inverted fingers, and everything was twisted, and I still cannot put my fingers in the position that David lived in. And he laid on the floor, and his mother was always there to take care of him, whatever he needed. And around one of those time periods, my father was an entrepreneur. And let's try this. And I came home from school one day, I was 15 years old, before I won the Corvair. And he said to me, we're going to Taylor this afternoon. It's a little suburb down south of Scranton. I bought 5 ice cream trucks. So we had 5 Chevrolets towed to the yard with ice boxes in the back. And you would go over to the ice cream store in Scranton, and they would pack it, they'd put a cube of dry ice, and they'd fill it up with boxes of different popsicles and ice cream bars and everything else. And we would hit the streets 10 o'clock in the morning to make the factory coffee break. And then the factory lunch break, the 2:30 factory coffee break. And then we would hustle home, get some dinner, and go out and hustle the streets to sell the kids their dessert from dinner. And we did that in the city of Scranton for the entire summer. I did. In the Scranton area, there's a very large Roman Catholic population. And one of the big things in July in the Scranton area is St. Anne's Novena. And people come from all over the East Coast to go to St. Anne's Novena. And they would pack the place. The monastery where they had this is a very large facility up in West Scranton. And we cut a deal, they will cut a deal, with the Passionate Priest running the place, that they would get X amount of pennies per 10-cent ice cream bar. And they got their take. We did 40-some novenas that year, and peeling in the nickels and dimes and taking care of the priest that night and everything else. And we did Pocono Drag Lodge every Sunday. That was a constant in life, to be at Pocono Drag Lodge. And we got to know several of the racers coming through that would be guest appearance. And Tommy Ivo came through a couple times. We met him back in that time period. Tommy Ivo was a big name back in the 60s. And we would see the farmer, Arnie the Farmer Bestwick, okay? Saw him several times. The most impressive, I thought, was Dandy Dick Landy with his wheel standing Dodge. I mean, that was just tremendous to see that car. And we'd have all those people come through, but the ice cream truck was there selling ice cream. And we'd barter lunch with the hamburger guy. We'd take a bunch of fudgesicles over. You can get a lot of hamburgers for a bunch of fudgesicles. Miracles, they do. And it was that kind of a summer. Give and trade, I turned 16 on a Saturday morning, and by 12 o'clock, I passed my license and I was getting ready to go on my route that day. To go, and I stayed on the route. So I went back to, I think I was going to be a junior at that point in high school. And I loved it. All my high school buddies had a place to go at night. Went for a ride, and we had a transistor radio on the dashboard. We were living big time. We sure were. We didn't have that every kid has. Mom and dad went to the leasing store and bought a car for my high school years. Kids had to work for their cars, and to show up and say, "Come on, we sell ice cream tonight." I thought that was paradise. You got an AM radio with Joey Schaefer on the dial and all this stuff, and life was good. It was really, so that was a good part of my life. That was a very good. Yeah. Last stop on my route.
Karen? Nice. You also worked with Richard Carroll.
I did.
And,
I did.
We tried to get hold of Richard to join us for the weekend, and he's a very elusive individual. We tried every contact we had up and down the East Coast, from Massachusetts down to Florida. We had various sightings of Richard Carroll from time to time, but nobody was able to really find exactly where he was. But
Richard Carroll lived in Arlington, Mass. 130 Park Avenue, Arlington, Massachusetts. He's not there anymore. Not that I know. But he is brilliant. There's something, one of the screws is torqued a little. He's brilliant to be with him. We went into his house the week we got married. We stopped to see him and his wife, Carol. Carol makes it easy for him. and he said, "Hey," he said, "I'm glad you're early." And he's showing us around. It's like we're all family. And we go to,
That'll be him.
yeah, it's Rick Carroll calling in.
Some justice in more direction.
Yeah. That's coming later, believe me. Go ahead.
So someone's got their hand up?
Could you possibly pass the mic back and forth so we
Yeah.
can hear?
Yeah, it's
And
difficult.
That's fine.
Don't talk over the top.
I'm going to hand it to Rick so he can, since he's going to do a lot of the speaking here for the next few minutes.
Anyway, we wound up in Arlington that Saturday or Sunday night, and Richard is on his front porch, and we stopped and called, let him know we're coming early. And we go in the house, and there is, I guess you'd call it a sitting room in an old Arlington, Mass mansion. And there on the coffee table is a 100% fully polished Roots blower. It's a nice. I have one in my house. Not so. But he had this, and he takes us to this room, and in the closet, there's a pair of polished heads, and everything he did, he stuffed away into little corners in that old house of his, and he would go and build stuff. At one point, he took 32 Ford coupe, cut it, chopped it, slammed it, put 1,000, and I'm exaggerating, he put 1,000 scoops in it, fully rolled aluminum panel bottom belly, even under the engine, extended the cowl so that the engine and the hood and the radiator, etc., were maybe about 15 feet from the middle of the car.
Wow.
And it was just, it was like, and it was at that table, the steer tires. It was just an enormous. He made a mistake. He built it in the basement. It don't come out. They had to rip a hole in the basement to drag it up. And it was magnificent. I never saw the car completed. I never saw it in a magazine. But the amount of effort that he had in that car, it was amazing. And he was absolutely brilliant. Have you had the pleasure of seeing his model cars?
Yeah.
I mean, they are they're spectacular. And you go in the living room, on the one side of the house, there's glass cases with the model cars in there. And I look at them, and at that point, I was fairly well accomplished professionally with model cars, and I would look at the stuff and say, it's just a different pedigree. It's in a world of its own. You could never drive it. You could never drive the car. The roof line on some of the T-buckets that he made would go over the top and back down in front of you. So I got roof in front of me, not window. It didn't matter. It was a concept. He was building concepts, and that was the brilliant part of Richard's work. I have dozens of photos of his stuff, and it's spectacular to see the paintwork and the thought in how he put them together. Everything was subject to tear apart. That if he didn't like the concept of a spring, he would tear that whole concept in his head apart, rebuild it, throw it back together, and put it on the car. And then he would refinish the car, and it's just yay big. It's not a big car at all. But to see that finished piece, it was amazing. We have his photos all over, and I wish I knew where he was. I guess the last I heard, he was leaving outside of Boston for the Florida area. Now, Richard has got to be in his mid-70s by now. He was on at least wife number 2 the last time I saw him. And I would say he's not slowing down on either end, with wives or cars.
Brave man.
And to see his work and how he comes up with the concepts behind it, that was brilliant to look at. The paint thought, he would come up with a custom paint job, and it was something that you couldn't imagine. Have you seen any of the photos of the pod cars?
Yes.
They're just spectacular. He was playing with some ideas about playing with paint going through the air too wet and too thick. So it would lay on the uncleared car as a strand, a candy tangerine strand, almost imitating a very rich oil fire. The black stuff just comes out and falls on whatever it wants to. He would build cars that way, and then he would bury them in clear, put them all together. I was blown away. We were at a car show, and he put something out on the table. It's a tractor trailer of, there's a weird tractor and a big, long, spindly trailer, and on top of it is a motorcycle. The thing is stretched out forever. What I could not get over was the wire wheels were handmade. They're all telephone wire and chrome when they're done and all that business. And say, most guys don't even have the tooling to make that. You need a Unimat lathe or better in order to pull that off, because you're doing a center hub with that at least 32 wires drilled and coming out of it. And they got it properly indexed, and you solder it all together, and you cut the wires, and that's that. And then you get it plated, which he had access to. They would never share it.
That particular model is actually on the cover of one of the old car model magazines, and there's a great how-to on the inside for some of his suspension systems, building those out of brass. And that's influenced a lot of builders that I know. Tim Slezak in particular was really taken by some of the how-tos that Richard Carroll used to publish. Well, anyway, Rick, we want to thank you very much for coming.
Thank you.